have the great privilege of being a teacher librarian and ESL and special education educator in a K-8 school in Brampton. And this is the third brand new school I've opened. Peel is one of the boards that's still booming. But it's the first time I've been able to design and co-construct a library from scratch. And I've been a teacher librarian in the past, where I inherited a collection and a series of systemic structures from someone else. And hopefully, library has changed a lot for those of us that are old enough to remember taking Dewey Decimal tests in about grade 5. Hopefully, the libraries have changed a lot. One of the sad situations across the province is that about 50% of our schools no longer have teacher librarians in place, and that's not to devalue the other library professionals who are in place. But it's really shifted the mindset to, is the library valuable in terms of moving curriculum forward, or is it valuable as a depot? There are lots of great library technicians who are making it much more than that, but it has been a huge shift in education, that if we have 50% of our schools in the province who don't have teacher librarians, those of us who still are lucky enough to have the job, we have to prove we still need it. And that becomes an ongoing structure that we need to deal with. So, when I came back to libraries, everybody was talking about makerspace. Makerspace, 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 and I didn't know what it was. And I was really scared, and I didn't want to do it wrong, and I figured that if I didn't know how to code everything known to humanity, I might as well not try. And then I went, what am I modeling for my students? That if I'm just afraid of something, I don't try it. So I decided to take those fears and go on a journey with my students. And the philosophy of our library, Learning Commons, with the supportive documents from the OLA and the Canadian School Libraries Association, is that student voice guides our practice, and that every systemic structure we put in place sends the message of trust. If you know the work of Stuart Shanker from York University, he talks about self-regulation, and that is the most important thing that we can give our children, particularly when they're constantly dominated by technology and all that, which he doesn't tell us to get rid of. He tells us to teach them how to cope. And so as a core philosophy, that's what we decided to do with our school, and particularly in the Library Learning Commons. So just to give you a little context, our little kindergartens, some of whom are 3, and our big grade 8, some of whom are 14, they can come to the library whenever they want, do whatever they want, get whatever they want, navigate it how they want, and I'm there as their curator and facilitator. It's their space, they own it, they're the community, they're in charge of it, and yes, 3-year-olds can come sign out books by themselves. It's awesome. And they want to do more research than anybody knows. They don't want necessarily to be handed the book they can actually read. They want to find about dinosaurs and sharks and haunted houses. I don't know why that's big with the 3-year-olds, but it really is. They're totally into it. So then this makerspace thing came. And I didn't want to just buy cool stuff because it was cool. I didn't want anything to be dusty. If a book is dusty in my library, I've made a bad choice. If a 3D printer is dusty, I've made a bad choice. If a sewing machine is dusty, I've made a bad choice. It's not always clean in there. That's not what I mean. So I started reading, because that's what I do, that's my strength. This is where I started, and I was still really scared. Laura Fleming, the book in the middle, it's about this big. She is American, and I'm always a little cognizant of the Common Core practices that are happening in education over there, and she's high school, but she's a quick read, and her whole philosophy is, your makerspace is about student voice and about what they want to do, and if you just buy the cool stuff, it becomes cool stuff really, really fast. And then I kept reading, and then I thought, I need to make this a community. So listening to the conversations that have already been happening from the public library and from your work, if I just do this myself, there's no capacity building. And if I disappear tomorrow, it becomes junky stuff in the library that nobody knows what to do with. So it's not about me, as much as coming and presenting like this argues that it is about me. It's not about me. It's about the kids, and it's about the other educators building a maker culture, not simply the stuff. And so I asked if any staff wanted to get together, and 10 staff came out, and I fed them, which helped. But then I put out all the materials that I've been reading, put out some videos, and we all had the same fears. That was the great part. We all were like, oh, we don't know what this is, and we don't know how to program a computer. But I had someone with a fashion degree who could make patterns and knew how to sew much better than my grandmother had taught me, although she thought I did a great job. We had people who'd been professional puppeteers. We had people on staff who'd done all these amazing things. So they took those resources, they went off, and they did their own reading. And then we kind of came to this as grounding our work. So again, this is from Laura Fleming, that little tiny book. She's gone the direction of selling her wares. I'm feeling anxious about that and the whole commercialization of making, which maybe is a whole thesis I need to write at some point, but at this point I was still sold. So you can buy her posters now, it's weird. So this was the process we decided to kind of focus our work on. These, I will happily send this out. I blogged about our process, so these are actual links to the blog. I'm not going to make you read my writing right now. But I really was stuck on the idea of the word maker, implying every child had to leave with a product. And I didn't want to missend the message that they all were leaving with the same birdhouse, because that's not making, right? That's shop class from years ago. We're also lucky we have a stack room, which is like the old school shop in a brand new school, and we have a kiln, which if you know schools, you know new schools don't get that stuff. I have a really awesome principal. So our solution was this, and there is a blog post that you can access about this. We could send out a survey monkey, or a Google form, and ask our kids what they want to learn. But we know about children, we know about adults. Lived experience determines our interests and our goals and our curiosities. So if I ask a kid, do you want to learn this? But they've never had any lived experience with it, they don't know that they want to learn it. And we have little people and we have big people in our schools, and until you try something, you don't know. So we set aside 4 days where every single class had 80 minutes of exploration. We did do the Lego wall thing. It's very trendy, but actually it's a big hit. Notice I'm a little bit of a design person, so it had to be sand colored because it went with the Reggio Emilia tone of the library. And I'm okay with the kids' creations being colorful, but not the blank wall. So they came for 80 minutes every single class, and they just explored 10 different activities that committee of people had created. I also have an administrator who gave us $1,000 for 4 days, which in public education also does not happen. But he's pretty awesome, and he made it happen. So there's our grade 8 boys learning to sew, still doing the cool peace sign thing, I know, but they were super excited. The number of them that made skirts for themselves, whoa. I was like, partially they figured out it was easy, but also it was really inspiring to watch them walk around the school with it. We had a disassemble station, which was a huge hit. What's inside that computer? What's inside that radio? Nobody lets me take these apart at home. Let's do it here. We had, if you're familiar with Kane's Arcade, it's a video from quite a few years ago, a little boy who literally made an arcade out of nothing but cardboard. So we had that playing as inspiration, and kids could create. We went with origami. We kind of went with a wide range. Rainbow looming was still really popular. I know it's commercial, the little elastics, but they knew how to do it. And then we could encourage them to try, well, what if you loomed with yarn? What would happen? What are the similarities in that concept? We put out some iPads with all kinds of very simple coding apps. And I have to tell you, nobody touched them. Because our kids have access to tablets all the time. Now, there's instructional value in those, and I'm not negating them, and I'm learning how to use Scratch all by myself now. But they were so engaged with the hands-on materials. So we had these brown sheets of paper up. These are my favorite. So when I saw it on the table, I was like, oh, yay. And we got feedback. This was our Survey Monkey. This was our Google form. And the kids told us what they loved and what it meant to them and how it impacted them. And we had sheet after sheet. And for some of our little friends who are not yet able to write themselves, they could do pictures, or they went back in their classrooms, they did a shared writing experience. The educators in the room know what I'm talking about. And then they brought that back. And this became our data that the committee came together. And then, that was great. Those 4 days were awesome. And then I had to open the library again. I didn't know what else to do. So I was really stuck. At the time, my Bitmoji was blonde, but the hair colors changed, so I updated it for you. So I went to the Maker Ed Toronto conference as a participant. I went to the Maker Festival with 3 of my 4 children, and they didn't want to leave. I tweeted out to a lot of my professional learning network on Twitter. In education, that's become a really strong networking piece for us. And I wrote about the community, the piece that you were talking about, the community that I discovered of people who would support me and tell me it's okay and don't be scared and there's more you can do. So we started out with what we called Maker Mondays. People might do those in their learning environments. And I started out with sending out a Google form to our entire school, and little ones, we helped them sign up, and they would sign up for workshops. So we tried to balance high tech and low tech, and when I say high tech, I know that there's some really high tech people in the room, just my version of high tech, okay? So the first workshop was finger knitting. If you've never done finger knitting, it's really easy and it's really awesome, and you don't have to know the difference between purling and knitting. And we had about 70 kids sign up. So I would run small workshops during the instructional day where maybe I would have, 10 kids from this group and 10 kids, so there were mixed grades, mixed ages, all of that. And then the next one we ran was iMovie and green screen. Big in schools, right? Everybody does their projects in front of a green screen now. Something else will come along, but for now that's it. So there I had about 150 kids. So it was now becoming Maker Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And 80 minutes out of an instructional day is 2 full periods. My administrator supported me doing it. I didn't want to use makerspace as a club. First of all, I think it devalues it. I think there's a lot more learning that happens. It's not a club. And secondly, that capacity building for me, if I leave, the club leaves. If it's embedded in the culture of the learning commons, the kids demand it. They're very strong with their voices, and it will continue. So then I offered sewing. And I had 275 children who wanted to learn to sew. So I borrowed some extra machines. We own 2 at the school, not the best quality, but I brought in mine from home, it was a little better. And I started doing workshops. And realistically, I can teach 6 kids to sew at a time. And we're not talking patterning, cutting on the bias, pinning. We're talking 2 rectangles of material. I did teach them what the right side and the wrong side was and how to turn their seams over, and they stitched 4 straight lines. And then I basically started crying at home every night. If I was gonna do 6 kids at a time, 275 little friends, and then they started telling their other friends who were like, I forgot to sign up, miss, can I come? What was I gonna do? So I kind of stopped. I panicked a little bit, and I said, I gotta stop the bus and I gotta reflect. So I went to the OLA Super Conference. Even if you're not in libraries, it's really awesome. So if you get a chance to go, it's pretty wicked. There's a teacher librarian in Peel named Melanie Mulcaster. She's just been in Phoenix this week presenting at the American School Libraries Association, so I'm very proud of her as her friend. And she inspired me to try something a little different. So we don't call it makerspace anymore. We call it open learning. And it's not to devalue the importance of making, but it is to let them know that there is 1 period a day where our students of any age can come down and do completely whatever they want. So some are sewing, some are researching for a Genius Hour project, some are using Lego, some are having robots travel all around the space, and that I will supervise them. So their educators do not have to be responsible for them at that time. We created an open learning Google site, which again, if you would like this, I can share it with you, where we had do-it-yourself videos, and then I kept reading. So I kept reading more and more. And how do I show that I know what I'm doing is exciting for the children, I can see learning happening, but how is it supporting the current thinking in education? And listening to you talk about how you go through your process of designing your game, it's inquiry. It's what we're asking children to do in education. And there's 2 camps in education right now. There's those of us who believe, and I think we're right. And then there's people who are still giving out worksheets and think they need the basics. And so I literally tweeted while you were talking, inquiry is important in the real world, okay? So this is the kind of work that we continue doing. So this is the message they see when they come to open learning every day. Some kids come every day. And for some kids, it's an emotional safe place. For some kids, it's a creative safe place. And for some kids, they just like the cool stuff. So I went back to my cool stuff and said, is it okay that they just like the cool stuff? I think it's okay if they just like the cool stuff, as long as we're moving the conversation forward. I don't clean it up. That's part of what this message is. They don't take care of it. It does not look good. It does not work. And this is what it can look like at any time. So we have kids of all ages trying all kinds of things. That fabric right there, we had an educator who owns a loom, and her class weaved fabric and then made tea towels for the office. Isn't that cute? But they came here to sew it. And they tell me what I hit it too hard, I think. They tell me what they want, right? They advise me what's working and what's not working. Glue guns, yeah, we're brave, we do it. They construct the learning environment, and they construct what's happening in the space. So how is this culturally responsive? Because that's what I'm arguing here today, that this is impacting culture. So from an Ontario document, monograph, this is their definition of culturally responsive pedagogy. I'm not going to read it to you. What I didn't realize in trying to go on my maker journey and not be so scared that I wouldn't do it, and in trying to honor student voice and the premise of self-regulation that I talked about at the beginning, and in trying to honor student choice, this is where I start crying, so just work with me. I connected to the children's home lives in a way that I didn't mean to. And they were guiding the process at this point. So this is the slide that gets me. I won't get you until I tell you why. So see the little heart up at the top. So that's a little girl who lives with a condition where she has no hair on her body and has to wear hats all the time and feels very isolated. And the school's done a lot of good things, and so have the kids to embrace her. And she came and made that heart and then opened up a whole conversation with me that's hers to only share with me, so I'm not gonna go into details, about what it's like to live her daily life. Just because she grabbed some duct tape and some paper. The flag up at the top and the little guy holding the t-shirt. These two little guys, 8 years old, I taught them how to sew. Literally those squares, like it wasn't good sewing. My grandma would be so mad. And they went home that weekend, and they live with their grandparents and their parents and extended family, as most of the children in our community do, which I'm starting to think should have been the way to go for my family. And their grandma, in first language, asked them what they learned at school. And they said they learned to sew. And their grandma said, okay, well, do you want to do more? So they went home on a Friday, they came back on a Monday, not having the same grandmas, not being next door neighbors. And one had sewed the flag of his home country, and one had sewed a t-shirt. And this gets me, I know it's so dumb. And came back and was so proud to show their class. So they didn't go tell them about the spelling words, because who cares? Technology will spell for us. They talked about that, and their grandmas had never thought to let their 8-year-old boys touch the sewing machines. So there was this complete connection to the home. The little girl with the hair bow, they were allowed to cut their fabric when they came and did that sew a rectangle thing. Hers happened to be quite long, as you can see. She wore that in her hair every single day for a year after she made it. And her mom said to me, she doesn't let me brush her hair, but now she lets me put her hair up. Which, as a mom of 4 girls, I know, it ruins your life. This army structure was created in minutes. And I mean, there's a strong base in there. There's scientific concepts that kids could really discuss by a student who does not self-regulate well, needs a lot of alternative learning experiences, and has a legacy and a history of some real challenges in his life. And he constructed that immediately, within minutes, knew exactly what he wanted to do, could explain to me the structure and why it worked. And because of some of his experiences in other aspects of making, his family members now have a stash of old computers in the garage that they encourage him to take apart and reconstruct into new things. Which, more power to them, that they have embraced that in him. And the structure up at the top, this is the piece and the hair bow, the little duct tape hair bow, very similar to this. The child who made it wore it all the time. Oh, someone did make me awesome Wonder Woman bracelets as well, which are kind of cool. The structure up at the top, when we first got the loose parts in, which I referred to that a little earlier, some of the older kids weren't really sure how to play with materials like that. So an educator and I created this little village, and then one of our students, who's not super verbal, decided his robot was going to destroy our village. But instead of telling him, oh no, that's our really pretty village, we filmed it. We filmed it in slow-mo. We each used a device, and we let him watch it and rewatch it and rewatch it, and then shared it with his educators, and then he could share his feelings about the experience to the best of his verbal ability. So I didn't know that me being afraid of making was going to lead to this. But this is what I firmly believe is happening when we embrace the maker movement with children and when we give them voice and choice. And just because I didn't have time to add it to the slides, because this is the latest learning journey for me, if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it, whether you're in education or not. Mitchell Resnick from MIT. And yes, I'm taking his course so I can actually learn how to use Scratch. And I made a funny little video about librarians when we're asked for books and people don't know the titles and the authors and we want to lose our minds. So I'm quite proud of that. But our journey has led to this. I'm not totally sure where it's going to go next. This is how we end open learning. We use a singing bowl to end creativity, and we have conversations that creativity being controlled by bells and schedules and buses arriving is really hard. And that children, we use the singing bowl to signal a 5-minute warning that as hard as it is, you have to pause your creativity, put it in the only locked cupboard in the space, everything else is open shelf, no locks on technology, no locks on the robots, nothing has gone missing, because kids are awesome. And then they have to take care of the space so that the next community of learners can come use it. And here's where we have started to head. So that Google site I mentioned, kids are now contributing their own do-it-yourself videos to it. That's just in the early phases. It's awesome. We're starting to do some pedagogical documentation on that page. And our next evolution is moving into human library. So very much like you were talking about having your innovators in residence, that we want to get those grandmas in now. So now it's time, grandmas coming in. So that's what we're working on. We also have some volunteers in the building who asked me to teach them to sew. So I'm going to get the grandmas in first because they're probably better than I am. And this is where we're headed. So I don't know where we'll be in 5 years. I might come back and tell you this was all not a good idea and I want to start something new. But right now, this is the journey we've been on, and we firmly believe it's having a profound impact on our learners.